Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today I have a very special guest on, Jeremy Ethier. This is the first time he's been on the podcast, and he's the founder of Built with Science. He has his bachelor's in kinesiology, and he also has over 6 million YouTube subscribers. So, Jeremy, appreciate you taking time out of your day, man, to hop on here. And yeah, just real quick before I hand it over to you, we actually met at the N1 Practical. It's funny. I remember I came downstairs and you were like checking in, and I was waiting to get a fork. And I was like, man, that dude's got to be going to N1. And then the next day, we freaking ran into each other in the elevator and got to hang out for a few days in N1. So, again, appreciate you hopping on here, man.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. It's an honor to be on here, man. As I said, like I stumbled across some of your episodes already prior to when we met, and I was a big fan of the content that you put on. So yeah, it's really my honor.
Yeah, and I know we both really enjoy the science side of things, so I think we'll have a great conversation. Real quick, before we dive into some of the topics we want to talk about today, if you don't mind, just maybe give a brief background on how you got to where you're at, man. 6 million YouTube subscribers, that's no joke. You obviously got to be doing something right there to get to that point. So just curious to hear your background and how you got to that point and where you're at today.
Yeah, I've been obsessed with fitness like ever since I was young. Like I remember I literally could not wait to turn 18 because that's the age where you're legally required to be able to get your personal training certification. So as soon as I was 18, got my personal training certification. I loved it. I learned a lot, started training clients. And then when I went to university, I took kinesiology just so I could dive deeper into the science behind the fitness side of things and just learn a lot more about biomechanics and whatnot. And really being a natural and not having like amazing elite genetics, I was just looking for whatever edge I could get, whatever could take me to the next level and just continue progressing and making gains. And I really found that with science. When I was in university, I had no idea that they actually run studies on, okay, what's the best way to build muscle, lose fat, and just fitness in general. So when I stumbled across, I think the first study I stumbled across was a 2017 meta-analysis by Brad Schoenfeld that went through the optimal volume for hypertrophy. And I was like obsessed. I just wanted to read any study I could get my hands on because I knew, okay, this is actually something it's not bro science. It's not he said, she said. This is like proven stuff. Obviously, there's nothing set in stone and research gives us insights on what may work, but still, it was better than just relying on opinions. And that's what drew me towards the science rabbit hole. And it turns out a lot of people also felt the same and were drawn towards the science. So as soon as I started making content surrounding like what I was finding, experimenting with, it did take off like pretty quickly, and I've been fortunate in that sense, and I've just been continuing to do that ever since.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Yeah, just getting away from the bro science side of things and actually, like you said, actually going through the science and no BS type stuff. And I think that's awesome because I think I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this, but I feel like in this kind of evidence-based space, it can be challenging to make science kind of cool or not cool, but something that people actually want to read. It's usually those kind of black or white, like yes or no things that really grab people's attention. And I feel like sometimes science can be a challenge to post that content and people enjoy it. Has there been anything specific that's like helped you be able to not only promote the science side of things, but also make it engageable and whatnot for people to enjoy?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a tricky thing to do. And especially if you're coming from a science background yourself and you're used to literally writing scientific research papers, is a whole different story trying to communicate that to, let's say, a Gen Pop audience. So one thing I do always think about, and it helps me a ton when creating content, especially based on like really complex scientific topics, is I just imagine if I was in the other person's shoes, right? If I'm making content towards a beginner, okay, I'm a beginner in the gym. If I watch this video or listen to, I don't know, this podcast, would I be able to understand it, let alone actually apply it and benefit from it? And if the answer is no, then I gotta edit the content such that it's communicated in a way that is easy to understand and also practical and provides an actual benefit for the viewer.
Yeah, because some of that sciencey stuff can go over people's head, but if you're able to break it down and make it digestible for the everyday person, that's what we're trying to do. And it can be a challenge. I don't know about you, but I know for myself when I try to talk about studies and like the kind of science behind it, you say something, but then this could happen, and then you end up going down this kind of rabbit hole with it. So again, being able to break it down, that's a skill, and I'm sure it helps you understand it even better as well too.
Yeah, and it's like you said, it's a balance because you don't want to like just dump things down too much because then you're missing out on a lot of the nuance that actually does have a lot of importance. So it really is the balance between staying true to the science, but also communicate in a way that is easy to understand and practical to use.
Yep. So I know we talked about this when we were in Colorado. I know you haven't done any research yet, but is that something that you'd like to get into at some point to be part of some studies and stuff like that at some point?
Yeah, for sure. So unfortunately, like I'm based in Vancouver, Canada, and most of the labs, university labs that are purely dedicated towards hypertrophy or fat loss or just body composition in general, they are mainly, there's a few really good ones located in the States, like University of South Florida is one of them, Brad Schoenfeld, Lehman College. There's nothing really dedicated purely towards hypertrophy of fat loss like nearby me. There is one university that I did get in touch with that is interested in running a few things. So yeah, I'm communicating with them and we're just going into the details of what it would look like to actually fund our own study because yeah, there's a lot of gaps in the research that I'm just genuinely curious about and feel like it would be good to contribute to and actually move the field forward. So yeah, that's one of the things that we're working on. It's definitely tricky and expensive, but it is something that I feel will actually benefit the community.
Yeah, and I think that would be super cool, man, because for you, it's not only you coach people. I know you don't coach, I don't think you coach people one on one anymore at this point, but I know you write programs for people, you have Built with Science, and then you obviously have you break down the research for people, but also like being a part of it, I'm sure that just is going to add another layer for you to be able to communicate even more. And, I'm sure being able to look at studies and tell people about it, I'm sure it's a lot different than actually doing them and being a part of it. I'm sure it's going to give you much better understanding of what goes into it and everything like that too.
Exactly. And I think a big gap in the research right now, which is definitely it has improved and it is improving, but it's just that a lot of the scientists who conduct the research, they have very little practical experience,
Yeah.
let alone have experience in the gym. You know what I mean? So that introduces a whole bunch of variables to a lot of the studies that we're consuming. Whether it's okay, like how hard were the participants actually training? And a huge one is just their form, right? Because as you saw with the N1 practical, even just minor compensations in your form can totally change the outcome of the exercise. So that is a huge variable. And that's also like a big thing that made me really interested in pursuing and funding my own research is because I have that knowledge and I know a lot of people who have that knowledge as well. So being able to be directly involved with the study, collaborating with really smart scientists, but also top at the top experts in terms of biomechanics and coaches, I feel like that's really necessary to solve a lot of the things that we're still like not sure about.
Yeah, and that's a good point too, right? Like even you love to train yourself, and again that adds another layer to it that you can add. But I'm sure even too, like you even like probably doing studies, being like, okay, now I know the freaking work that's got to go into getting these studies, finding the participants, and making sure all those variables are in check as well. I'm always anytime I have a researcher on here, I'm always like, man, I just really appreciate what you do because I'm sure it just takes so much work to get all that set up as well too.
Dude, it gives me like tremendous respect. I already had a lot of respect for researchers and published scientists, but even just in the beginning stages of funding our own study, like it's given me the utmost respect for these guys. I don't think people realize the amount of work that actually goes into publishing a study. Like it's incredible.
Yeah, because all you're reading is you're just reading the words and you don't understand the years and all the thought that goes into it, man. Are you able to, you don't have to go into the details, but what are some areas that you would like to look at? Is there anything specific or anything like that? And if you can't go into it, I understand as well too. I know you have to be careful with what you talk about here with some of this before it's out and everything.
Yeah, just because I haven't confirmed the topic, it probably will be something surrounding long length training. So either comparing exercises where it differs in terms of the muscle length and or where the muscle is being challenged the most relative to its length. I think that's like a huge kind of a new emerging area of research that I'm sure you're familiar with, and it's genuinely interesting to me. I think aside from that, there's a few other things, and we just gotta weigh the pros and cons of each and the effort and resources that are involved in executing it. But I do think, for example, another one could be something surrounding frequency and volume. Like we have a lot of research that has covered the impact of frequency at relatively lower volumes, low to moderate volumes, but we have nothing that is really investigated, okay, if I'm doing like 20 plus weekly sets per muscle, is that where higher frequency training each muscle 2 to 3 times per week, is that where it becomes beneficial? So there's definitely like a few gaps that I'm genuinely just like curious about that we might pursue. But yeah, we're still just trying to figure out what exactly we want to do as a first one.
Yeah, and those are both super hot topics, right? How often should I train? How often can I train? How much volume? And then the long muscle length one as well too. That's
Mhm.
a super popular one right now. Where do you stand with that at the moment?
The long muscle length trend. I think that we need to figure out, I think we have some indication that challenging a muscle more when it's at a longer muscle length is more important than the degree at which the muscle is stretched or lengthened. But I do think that is something that we need to be clear about. And when people like talk about long muscle length training, really two things we're talking about. Again, it's the challenge, right? Is it more challenging in the lengthen or the shorten position? And then a separate thing is actual muscle length. Like how much is the muscle actually being lengthened? Yeah, it's hard to tell which one is more important. If both of them together would lead to the best results. So it's hard to say, but I do think like generally applying the concept of long leg muscle training into your routine does seem like a really good way to get a small benefit in your rate of muscle growth. And that's something like I've been personally experimenting with a ton in my own training, and I've seen like really solid results from it. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting area of research that develops more and more throughout the next few years.
Yeah, and it really just sounds, again, you probably want to bias it towards long muscle length, but then is it just, for example, I think maybe one of I think it was a study they did where they looked at, was it the preacher curl and like the incline bicep curl? And it's, yeah, you can get a little bit more length in that bicep curl and the incline
Mhm.
bicep curl, but that's not necessarily the hardest at the bottom. There's not as much
Mhm.
resistance there at the bottom, whereas the preacher curl was like, maybe they weren't as long, but it was like a little bit tougher in that lengthened position there. And so they saw a little bit more muscle growth there with that particular exercise.
Yeah, exactly. So that's like a good study that supports the idea that challenging the muscle at when it's relatively at its more lengthened position might be more important than actually like the degree at which you get that muscle in that lengthened position if the challenge is not at that lengthened position.
So you said in your training, you pretty much like you're biasing that. Do you still do some like shortened work from time to time, or would you say most of your, yeah, what does that kind of look like?
Yeah, I do. I would say I bias most of my training around long muscle lengths and like primarily challenging the muscle at those longer muscle lengths. So for example, like chest, doing a lot of flies and presses and just your standard stuff. And then for arms, yeah, I've found a lot of success with preacher curl variations, behind the body cable curls. And for
Yeah.
delts, I've seen a lot of really good results just from the behind the body cable lateral raise, but setting the cable such that it is more difficult in that beginning stretch position compared to just doing like your standard dumbbell lateral raise. So those are a few examples of how I'm applying it, but definitely still applying more shortened position work, right? It's not like dumbbell lateral raises are just out the window forever. Because another thing that is less talked about surrounding the research is that like lengthened training does seem to be more fatiguing than training in the shortened position. So it's hard to tell, okay, we know that if we look at an exercise in isolation or one set in isolation, training at a longer muscle length is probably better. But what happens if you have 15 sets and all of those are longer muscle lengths? How would that impact your fatigue and recovery? And then also, maybe there's a benefit in doing both, right? So I think those are like some other gaps that we'd have to figure out. But for me personally, like I said, most of my training is centered around long muscle lengths and then just sprinkling in like training at the shortened position just to get in some more volume with less fatigue and then also any potential benefit that I might give, even in the sense of like regional hypertrophy, right? For long muscle lengths, you get more muscle growth, but most of the growth tends to be in the more distal region of the muscle. So for example, the incline curl versus preacher curl study, for the preacher curls, they saw a ton more, not a ton, they saw more growth, significantly more growth in the biceps, but most of that growth was in the distal or the bottom part of the biceps. And that's also what I've experienced, like applying a ton of deep stretch dumbbell flies to my chest, especially the distal part of the chest, like the outer chest, that has developed considerably. So yeah, there could be a benefit there as well. It's like you do both lengthen and shorten work, and it works like the distal and proximal regions of the muscle as well.
Yeah, so it pretty much sounds, again, hey, definitely incorporate some of this into your training, but just don't neglect the shortened position altogether. At least not yet. Like we don't have enough
Mhm.
evidence to be like, hey, we don't want to do the short. And then we obviously learned some things that and one where, for example, like those press arounds and stuff like for the chest, you really can't get that shortened position very well with your chest. So doing something like what was it, a pull around or push
Yeah.
around, that's going to hit that shortened position a little bit better there, which it's a little bit tougher to do that with machines or dumbbells or anything like that. I also too, I love the behind the back cable lateral raises for the delts, man. That's freaking awesome. And
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but for me, definitely like focusing on the delts with the lengthen work and then even the back too, it's been super helpful, right? Because, you know, I don't know about you, but for the longest time for me, it was like, hey, full range of motion. So I took that with the back training. And I think that's still a great like way to train. But for the back particularly, it's like most of the stuff is tougher and is toughest in the shortened position. So then
Mhm.
you miss out on maybe some of that lengthen work. So maybe adding in a little bit more partials and stuff like that's been really helpful for the back training. Is that something that you've seen or mess around with or anything like that as well too on your end?
Oh yeah, dude. That's one thing I forgot to mention. I also have incorporated a lot of partials. Like after I can't get any more full range of motion reps, just going for as many half reps as I can. And this is mainly applicable to exercises where it is tougher in that shortened position. So if you're doing like, I don't know, a pec deck for your chest, once you can't do any more full reps where your arms almost completely come together, instead of stopping there, like you have a ton more reps that you can get just going halfway. And that seems to be the most beneficial part of that exercise. So I've applied that with back training because, as you said, pretty much like all back exercises, the vast majority of them, they do work the back the hardest in that shortened position. So if you're always stopping after you can't do one more full range of motion rep, you're missing out a lot on potential gains that you can make just by extending the set and working through your back through that lengthened position more.
Yep, that's been a big game changer. There was the back, and from my understanding, and this may be there's no direct research, like there's no research on that for the back because I think it's kind of like a hard muscle group to do research on. From my
Yeah.
understanding, correct?
Yeah, because it's a tricky area to measure. And that's mainly why we don't see a lot of back research aside from like EMG stuff, is because like the muscles are not like as commonly measured, like for example, with ultrasound as the other areas of the body. They're just more difficult to measure. And then also you can't really manipulate back exercises as much as you can for exercises on other parts of the body. Again, most back exercises are going to be hardest in the shortened position. And it's very difficult to manipulate it in a way that's going to make it more difficult in the lengthened position, unless you get one of those fancy prime machines that we saw ahead to N1, where literally just you put the weight here instead. It's more difficult in the beginning. But aside from that, you have to get super, super creative, and it's unrealistic for the vast majority of people. I think what would be interesting is, yeah, as you said, doing a hypertrophy study on the back and then just comparing what happens if you stop after you can't do any more full reps versus you extend the set with partials. Obviously, you're getting a little bit more volume. That would be a variable, but it'll be interesting to see nonetheless, like how much more potential gains you could make just by extending that set.
Yep, and hey, maybe some of those old school bodybuilders had it right, man. Right, where you just do some of those partials there with the back. Cool. That's a good kind of talk there on length and partials. I do want to spend some time chatting about N1 since we both went to that. Was there anything specific that maybe you took away or any interesting findings from those 4 days? Like we were talking off air, that was a long 4 days, a ton of information, but it was super cool. And obviously we got to connect and everything like that. But yeah, was there anything that you took away or maybe that you've applied in your training or in your built with science programs or anything like that?
Yeah, I think it just gave me like a much deeper understanding of biomechanics and anatomy of different muscles, and also just the importance of exercise execution, right? It's like just such minor changes in your form can really affect the muscle that's being targeted, and also just like the what you're getting from that exercise. So I think that was really valuable, and just because even for me, when I was doing some of the exercises and learning them, there's like little compensations that I would make that the coaches would have to correct me on and be like, hey, I've noticed your elbow swaying like this. Try to keep it like this. You know what I mean? Yeah, it just made me look at things at a much more granular level. It's hard because a lot of it was very specific and complex, which I think is great for people like us who are very advanced and can apply that to our training. I think like a good chunk of it, it would be difficult to apply to, I don't know, like a Gen Pop audience. There's definitely things that can be, but for me, I think the most value I got from it is just like those more advanced exercises and understanding of biomechanics. And there's a lot of things that I'm personally experimenting with in my own training from it. But for example, like the shoulders, right? Typically we think of it as most people just think of shoulders, but people who like know their stuff, okay, there's front delts, side delts, rear delts. And then you go to N1 and they're like, okay, there's front delts, side delts, rear delts. But the rear delts, they actually have three regions,
Yep.
right? And you can have an exercise that hits each of the three regions of the rear delts. So it was like, holy crap, like we're getting like really specific. And that's something I that was really eye-opening and something I'm experimenting with my own training because you can literally feel the difference, right? If you do like an exercise for the middle part of your rear delts, like you'll feel that. And again, it's hard to say like how beneficial that is for, I don't know, let's say a beginner in the gym, but for somebody who's more advanced like myself and are looking for these finer detail things, like that was like hugely valuable.
Yeah. For example, like if you're somebody that's been training for a while and it's like you do have maybe, again, maybe you've been, maybe you thought it was like just, hey, you just, this is going to hit the front delt. So this is what I'm going to do for that. But like you said, we can break it down to even three divisions, which is crazy. That was new to me, just going to that. And maybe for somebody like you that's been training for a while, it's maybe you've been doing it in a way that was developed one area of that front delt and it's like that area is super built up and it's okay, actually I can make my muscle look a little bit more round and more developed if I just maybe change my technique slightly. I'm sure that's probably something that maybe you implemented into your training or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. They, and then like you said, the machines that they had there, the prime ones, it would be nice to have something like that at every gym I went to. And it makes it super easy, like you said, to load it in the lengthened position, the shortened position, which is super nice. How did you like those, the cast set there for the leg extension and the leg curl?
Dude, that was probably what wiped me out for days after I got home. The workouts in general, like they were way tougher than I expected. I know that they sent an email and they're like, we recommend you take a couple of rest days before you come. I should have listened to that. I had no idea that the workouts would be as difficult as they were. And like some of the days you're doing two a days, right? And that one day where we did a two a day leg workout, that was crazy. The cast set was difficult, but the fact that it was just leg extension, leg curl, it wasn't too bad. The hardest thing for me was that like single leg glute press. That gives me
Yes.
nightmares. That honestly gives me nightmares. I will never be buying that machine in my life.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but my glutes, man, those were for like I don't do very much like direct glute work. I don't know if you do either in your training, but man, my freaking glutes were sore for 3, 4, 5 days. That's what got me the most there was all the glute work that we did.
Oh yeah, dude. It was funny because Cass was saying like most guys, they just like their glutes are wiped for days afterwards. Whereas most girls who attend the camps, like their glutes are good to go the next day just because they're used to doing that much volume.
So what was there anything else that you are messing around with your training or that you implemented or anything like that from N1?
Mainly just some of the exercises, like some of the biceps, tricep stuff, just getting like really specific with the different heads and a lot of the rear delt stuff, like I mentioned, because like mainly for rear delts, I would just do like the cable reverse fly. So being able to hit it from different angles, I've noticed like, whoa, I'm feeling something in my rear delts like I've never felt before. So yeah, just applying like a lot of the different exercises that we learned about into my routines as well. Just pulling from different angles like we learned. Generally, like most of my lat work would just be for lower lats. So figuring out ways that you can really bias the upper thoracic region of the lats, that has been huge, and I can definitely feel the difference.
Yeah, lat training, dude. That's a big one. I feel before I learned about some of N1 stuff, that was again in just working in that lengthened position a little bit more, man. I feel like lats specifically have been a muscle group that have just benefited a ton from some of this new stuff because I feel like that's a muscle group when you hear like judges feedback for like physique athletes. I feel like it's always, oh, I got to get my back bigger. I got to get my lats bigger. And I wonder
Yeah.
if it's just because maybe people just have been, they just don't train the lats in a way that is as beneficial as it can be. Because a lot of that pulling, as we learned, anything with kind of elbows flared out is going to be a little bit more upper back. And that's how I always train my back. I don't know if that's how it was for you as well, too.
Dude, 100%. I was actually looking at pictures of my back, like from my after a few years of training, zero lats, like nothing there. And I was doing like heavy pull-ups, heavy lat pull downs, all the back stuff, but my lats were literally like non-existent. So I would say if there is one muscle that is the most underdeveloped on most people, it would probably be the lats because it is a really tricky area to train. There's really specific exercises you have to do, but also there's a very specific form you have to apply to it because other muscles can easily take over, especially if your lats are undeveloped and weak to begin with. So that's probably an area where I've seen a ton of growth just from nailing down the exercises and the execution in the past couple of years. But yeah, I would totally agree with you.
We just got a few minutes left here. I know you got to hop off. Is there anything you're working on from a training perspective right now, or anything like that? Anything special, or yeah, what's that look like for you at the
You
moment?
mean in terms of like my
Like your
personal
yeah, like
training?
your personal training and stuff like that.
I like my I told you when I was there, but my chest has been literally the most stubborn muscle group for me to grow.
Of course.
Yeah, like many people. But dude, I tried everything and modifying my form, trying all different types of exercises, experimenting with volume. And I finally feel like this past year, like I've seen like actual significant growth. And that gets me super excited. Yeah, I'm just trying to prioritize chest, grow the back a little bit more as well, and just experimenting with a lot of the long muscle length research, especially with chest. That's why I said earlier, like I'm doing a lot of dumbbell flies, focusing on that deep stretch. And yeah, it seems things are working for sure. One thing I am actually just genuinely curious about is, you know how like most back exercises, they challenge the back the most in that shortened position. So does that theoretically mean that, assuming that training at longer muscle lengths is indeed a lot more beneficial for growth, does that mean that everybody's backs just proportionately grow slower than everything else? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's super interesting. So you're just probably, if that's the case, it probably is the case because most people aren't really getting the most out of it. And then, for example, I know you said your chest has been something that's maybe lagged. We definitely get a ton of length and exposure with the chest,
Mm,
and you don't get that with the back. That definitely could be it. I also think people just like to train the muscles on the front of their body more than their back.
yeah.
That's probably part of it as well too.
Yeah. It just makes me wonder, what if we had just like really good back machines? Would everybody's back literally just be 1.5 times times
like
bigger?
like the prime machines where you
Yeah,
can load it in
exactly.
the lengthened position. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
absolutely. Do you do for your nutrition? Do you do phases where you like are gaining weight and then you cut weight, or you try to like stay the same kind of weight throughout the year? Or what does that kind of look like for you?
Yeah, typically I've stuck to like your traditional, just like a lean bulk and then diet and phase. I have toned down the surplus that I'm using. Like right now, I'm in a lean bulking phase and I've been in it for the past 6 months, and I've only gained like 1.5 pounds per month. And that's a lot slower than what I used to do. And that's just based on a lot of the new research that has come out. One of the studies with Dr. Eric Helms that he helped me with a video on for bulking, like it just showed us that you probably don't need to be in a crazy surplus to build muscle. And in fact, it's a lot smaller of a surplus than you need in order to maximize muscle growth. So that's been like one tweak that I've really made with my nutrition. And I've this past year, like I've seen like really solid gains and with not as much like fat gain that I would typically put on during a bulk. So yeah, it's interesting, and obviously it's just you're always learning. 3 years from now, I'll probably look back at what I'm doing now. I'll be like, huh, what was I doing? You know what I mean?
Yep. Hey, and that's how it should be, right? And you're interested in the science, and that's how it should be, right? You should always be like, hey, that's what we thought then, and you're always trying to get better and learning from what you've done in the past. So, last question before I let you go: what would you, if there was one video for people to go look at on your YouTube, what would be the one that you would lead them to?
Oh, that's tricky.
Or you could pick two. I'm sure you could pick one or two. It's up to you. If it makes it a little bit easier to decide between two.
I would say it depends on your goal, but if what's the primary goal of your
Yeah,
listeners? Build muscle, lose fat?
body composition, right? So lose some fat, build some muscle.
Okay. I would say that if your priority is to build muscle, I did a video where it's called, I can't even remember what it's called. I think it's called The Smartest Way to Build Muscle from
I see it. Yep.
seven scientists or something. And that is my goal with that, was just to make a one-stop shop for everything you need to know about building muscle. So I brought in 7 different scientists: Dr. Milo Wolf, Mike Israel, Daniel Plotkin, Brad Schoenfeld, Alan Aragon, Eric Helms. Just a ton of interviews and just so much good insight all in one video. So that would definitely be one I'd recommend. And I did a similar thing for fat loss. I think it was called How to Actually Belly Fat. And that's where I brought in, again, just a host of a bunch of different experts to really nail down, okay, what actually works, what's the difference between subcutaneous and visceral belly fat, and just the optimal approach to losing fat in general. So I would say that those two are excellent resources. Shout out to all the scientists that I brought in, and thank you for providing that value on those videos. But yeah, I think like those are enough to get people like started and just like fully aware of this is the current state of the research, at least at that time of the video.
Yeah, and I think that I'm looking at now the muscle building one was just 3 months ago. So all that stuff, I'm sure science is always changing, but I'm sure that stuff's pretty much up to date. I think do I see a thumbnail here? Is that Josh Pellin? Do you have as well too in there
Oh
by
yeah,
chance?
sorry,
Okay.
sorry. That's yeah. He talked about intensity and training to failure. Sorry, I forgot to mention that one. There were
We
just so
just
many people. I was just like,
Yeah, I think you got all seven there. I just had Josh on, dude. He's super smart, man. I love talking to him about. He's real big into the research.
Josh is awesome. A big thing about these guys is they're not just like super knowledgeable, but every single person that I've talked to so far has just been like incredibly kind and just like genuine people. And yeah, man, Josh was like one of them where I was like, oh wow, like this dude is awesome. You know what I mean?
Except for Dr. Mike. No, I'm just kidding. Dr. Mike's super nice and funny, man. I love listening to him talk. He's
Dude,
always got jokes.
I don't know how he just like when I was talking to him, it was like an hour and a half, and just like he has just like, so many jokes and crazy metaphors that just like work perfectly.
Yep.
I would love to just get inside his brain and just see how it works.
His freaking analogies are spot on, dude. I'm just like, how did you even like
Yeah,
that?
they're like the weirdest analogies, but they work perfect.
I don't know about you, but I would be super nervous to like be coming up with analogies on the spot like that because I'd be like, man, these sound stupid, and I
Dude,
just
that's
yeah,
what I mean. If it was me, like I would literally have to spend hours just pre-planning, put a doc, and these are the analogies. Whereas for him, it's just like, boom, on the fly. I have this in the bank. I'm like, how does that work?
Anything else coming out on your end soon, man, that you want to let the audience know about or anything?
Aside from my usual videos, as I said, like being a natural and just somebody who like was never like blessed with crazy good genetics, like science is the one thing that I turn to, and I have seen tremendous results from applying to my training and nutrition. I'm sure you can say the same. It's if you had all the best practices according to science for both training and nutrition, like if you had that literally in day one of starting your journey, like how much time would that have saved you and just mistakes you would have made? You know what I mean? Yeah, exactly. So my goal is just to spread more and more of that research. And for people who are interested, we do have like step-by-step programs that cover both training and nutrition. And that's where we apply all the current state of the research into just an easy to follow program that you can use. And those are over at builtwithscience.com. But aside from that, man, it's just, yeah, I try to put out videos as often as I can on my YouTube channel, as well as Instagram and TikTok when I have time. So those would probably be the best areas just to keep updated with what I'm doing.
Yeah, it seems like you're a little bit more active on YouTube than you are with Instagram.
It's tough, man, trying
I bet.
to keep up with all the different platforms. It's every year there's, oh, here's another platform you got to keep up with.
Hey, you might not have. That's here in the States. I forget you're up in Canada. We might not have TikTok anymore. I don't even know what the hell's going on with that. I actually don't mess with TikTok, but yeah.
I'm actually, yeah, I've heard a lot about that. I'm interested how it's gonna pan out. I feel lucky though because I'm not dependent on TikTok, but for people who are literally like TikTok is their everything, like I can't imagine like how nerve-wracking that might be.
Yeah, no, exactly, man. Probably a good idea to spread it out a little bit if you can, so you don't run into that issue. But again, man, really appreciate your time. I know you're a super busy guy, so love having you on here. Glad we were able to connect in Colorado. And yeah, man, thanks for coming on, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Sounds good, man. Likewise, thanks for having me. It was a blast.